My family evicted me from the basement. I paid $1,800 to give it free to my unemployed brother when I refused to live in a craft room. I vanished to another state without telling them and blocked all contact. Now they're begging me to return, but they'll never know where I am. I'm 29 years old. I work in logistics and I travel out of town like 2 weeks a month. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened with my family basically forced me to rethink my entire life and move to another state just to be able to breathe. I guess I should start at the beginning, or how I ended up living with my parents in the first place. Although the truth is, it was never really living with them, in the traditional sense. You know, it was more like being a tenant who just happened to share DNA with the landlords. About 3 years ago, when I was 26, I was looking for a place to live in Edmonton, and the prices were completely insane. Like impossible for someone who had just gotten a decent job but was still paying off student loans. My mom, Nancy, offered me their basement, which technically was a complete suite with its own entrance, small kitchen, bathroom, and everything. She told me I could have it for $1,000 a month, which sounded reasonable compared to the shitty apartments I'd seen for double that. My dad, William, agreed, and everything seemed like a good arrangement. You know, I'd have my space, they'd have extra income, win-win, or so I thought. What I didn't mention is that from the beginning there was like this weird dynamic, where my brother Andrew, who's 32, had always been the obvious favorite. Not that I was mistreated or anything, but there was this clear difference in how they treated him versus me. When Andrew got married and had kids, he basically became the center of my parents' universe, and I was like the responsible, boring daughter who always had her life together. So I didn't need attention, you know what I mean? But anyway, at the time it didn't bother me that much, to be honest, because I was focused on my career and building my own life. The first year in the basement was fine. I mean, I paid my $1,000 on time the first day of every month, kept everything clean, was hardly ever there because my job took me out of town constantly. After the first year, my mom told me they needed to raise the rent to $1,300 because property taxes had gone up and blah blah blah. Okay, a little annoying, but I accepted it. Then, like 6 months later, another increase to $1,500. And then, about a year ago, it reached $1,800 a month, which was already more than what many of my friends were paying for complete apartments downtown. But every time I questioned the price, my mom would make me feel guilty saying things like, well, if you'd rather leave and pay $2,500 somewhere else, go ahead, or I thought you valued being close to family. My dad always backed up everything she said, basically nodding and repeating her arguments word for word. So I kept paying, even though it bothered me more and more because, honestly, I was hardly ever there. My job involved being out of Edmonton like 15 days a month, so I was basically paying $1,800 for a place I used half the time. But whatever, it was convenient to have a base. I didn't have to worry about getting an apartment or dealing with unknown landlords, and I stored a lot of my stuff there. It worked, I guess, until it stopped working. About 8 months ago, Andrew lost his job. I don't remember exactly what he did, something related to sales or marketing, but the point is he got laid off and suddenly he, his wife, and their 2 kids had no way to pay their mortgage. They lived in a house that was probably bigger than they could afford even when Andrew had a job. But you know how it is, they'd always lived beyond their means. My parents immediately went into full rescue mode, talking about how family has to support each other and how Andrew needed time to find another job without the pressure of losing his house. At first I thought, okay, my parents are probably going to lend him money or something, which seemed fine to me. I mean, he's their son and they have the right to help him. But then, like 2 weeks after Andrew lost his job, my mom called me and said we needed to talk. I went to the house. Well, I went upstairs from the basement to the living room, and there they both were with those serious faces, like when they're about to give you bad news. My mom started by saying that Andrew and his family needed to move in with them temporarily because they couldn't maintain the house, and that the plan was for them to live in the basement, my basement, because it was the only space with enough privacy and amenities for a family of 4. I just sat there like processing what I'd just heard, and the first thing I said was something like, okay, and what about me? And my mom, without any expression of guilt or discomfort, told me I could move into the craft room they had on the 2nd floor. The craft room, literally, a space like 10 feet by 10 feet where my mom kept her threads and fabrics and her sewing machine. She told me they could take the craft stuff out and put a twin bed in there, and that I could keep using the hallway bathroom that she shared with their bedroom. I remember I laughed, like a laugh of disbelief, because I thought she was joking. I told her, "Mom, I'm paying $1,800 a month. I can't live in a craft room without my own bathroom." And she responded with that voice she used when she wanted to make me feel like a selfish child. She told me, "Well, Amanda, your brother is going through a very difficult time, and he has kids to support. I thought you'd understand the situation." My dad added something about family sacrifices and how when he was young he did whatever was necessary for his family. I told them no, that it didn't make sense, that I was paying for a specific space and that it wasn't fair for them to kick me out just because Andrew couldn't keep his job. My mom got super defensive and started saying I was selfish, that I'd always been the difficult daughter, that Andrew had young children who needed stability. I reminded her that I literally paid them almost $2,000 a month, and that should count for something. And she hit me with, "Well, if you don't want to help your family, then maybe you should look for another place." I left there furious, went down to the basement, and started looking for apartments immediately. The problem was that getting a decent place in Edmonton with short notice was almost impossible, and plus I was out of town constantly for work, so I needed something that didn't require being physically present to sign papers and do inspections and all that crap. I spent like 3 days looking for options, and basically all of them were horrible or super expensive or required an application process of weeks. I finally decided that the most practical thing was to move out temporarily and stay in hotels or resorts during the weeks I wasn't working out of town. It sounded expensive, but I did the math, and between what I'd been paying in rent and what the hotels would cost, it more or less balanced out. And at least I'd have my peace of mind. I told my mom I was moving out in 2 weeks, that I needed that time to pack and organize my stuff. She acted like I was being dramatic, but she didn't try to convince me to stay in the craft room, which confirmed to me that it was never a real option. It was just a way to force me to leave without telling me directly. I moved out on a Saturday, rented a storage unit for my furniture and most of my stuff, and packed the essentials in suitcases. Andrew and his family moved into the basement literally 2 days after I left. There was no transition period or anything, like they already had everything planned. During those 2 weeks I was packing. My mom acted super normal, like nothing was happening, asking me about my work and if I wanted to stay for dinner. It was surreal. Honestly, the first few weeks after moving out were weird, but also liberating. When I was working outside of Edmonton, I obviously stayed in the hotels the company paid for, and when I came back, I'd book rooms in nice resorts or hotels, like treating myself well because I deserved it after all that drama. I didn't talk much with my parents during that time, just occasional texts from my mom asking how I was, but nothing deep. Then, like a month after I'd moved out, I got a text from my mom saying, "Hi, sweetie, just reminding you that this month's rent is due tomorrow. You can do the transfer whenever you can." I stared at the message for like 5 full minutes, trying to understand if she was being serious. I responded, "Mom, I don't live there anymore. Andrew's in the basement now." And she wrote back, "Yes, but we still have expenses, and you said you were going to help with family finances." I called immediately because this had to be a misunderstanding. My mom answered all casual, and when I told her that obviously I wasn't going to pay rent for a place I didn't live in, she started with her speech about how family supports each other, that Andrew was looking for work, but in the meantime, someone had to help, that they couldn't cover all the expenses alone. I told her I'd already contributed more than enough during the 3 years I lived there, and that now I needed to focus on my own expenses. She got super cold and told me, "I understand. I guess now that you don't need us, we don't matter anymore," and hung up. During the next 2 weeks, I got messages from my dad, from my Aunt Elizabeth, my mom's sister, and even from a cousin I hardly ever talked to, all basically telling me I should help my family in these difficult times. My dad was especially insistent, sending me long messages about family responsibility and how he'd always taken care of his parents when they needed it. I felt guilty. I'm not going to lie. Because part of me thought, am I a bad daughter for not wanting to keep paying? But then I remembered that I didn't owe them anything, that I didn't already paid fair rent for years, and that Andrew was an adult who needed to solve his own problems. Eventually, after like 3 weeks of constant pressure, I transferred them $500 with a note that said, "To help with groceries," because I felt like maybe a small gesture would calm things down. Massive mistake. My mom immediately interpreted it as confirmation that I was going to keep contributing financially. And 2 weeks later, she sent me another message, asking for the monthly contribution. I told her the 500 had been a one-time help, not a monthly commitment, and that's when things got really ugly. My dad called me, super angry, telling me I was being incredibly selfish, and that if I wasn't going to help my family, then I shouldn't bother calling myself part of it. I told him I had my own expenses, that I was paying for storage, hotels, food, and that it wasn't my responsibility to support Andrew and his family. He yelled something at me about how I had kids and I didn't, so clearly I had more money available, which was completely absurd logic, but that's how they thought. After that call, I got an email from my Aunt Elizabeth. And when I say email, I mean like 3 pages of text about the importance of family, stories about how in her generation everyone helped each other, and basically a complete sermon about my supposed obligations as a sister and daughter. It was exhausting just reading it. I didn't respond because what was I going to say? I wasn't going to change my mind, and clearly she'd already decided I was the villain of this situation. Things calmed down for like 2 weeks. I thought maybe they'd finally accepted my position. But then I got a message from my mom saying the whole family was going to have a virtual meeting to discuss the family situation and that it was important for me to participate. Something in my stomach told me this was going to be horrible, but I agreed because part of me still had hope that we could have a rational conversation. The virtual meeting was basically an ambush. There were my parents, my Aunt Elizabeth, 2 of my uncles from my dad's side, Andrew and his wife, and like 3 cousins. Everyone had their cameras on, staring at me like a trial, and my mom started by saying we needed to resolve the family tension and find a solution that worked for everyone. Then she proceeded to explain to everyone, as if they didn't already know, that Andrew was out of work and needed support, and that I, as a family member without kids and with a stable job, was in the best position to help but was refusing. One of my uncles started talking about how when he was young, he helped his siblings with money, and how that's what functional families do. My Aunt Elizabeth added something about karma, and how someday I was going to need help, and no one was going to be there for me. Andrew was sitting there with a total victim face, not saying anything, just letting everyone speak for him. I tried to explain my point of view, that I'd already contributed for years, that it wasn't my responsibility to support him, but every time I spoke, someone interrupted me or made me seem cruel and selfish. My dad finally dropped the bomb. He told me they'd calculated that I should contribute $2,000 monthly to help cover Andrew's mortgage and the kids' school fees. $2,000. I laughed again, that nervous laugh like, "Are you serious?" I told them that was completely unreasonable, that Andrew needed to get a job, any job, and stop expecting me to support him. My mom told me, well, he can't accept just any job. He needs something at his level that pays well, which seemed ridiculous to me because he'd been out of work for like 5 months and clearly that level of pickiness wasn't working. The meeting ended with everyone basically telling me to think about it, to consider what was right, that family came first. I disconnected, feeling completely drained and manipulated. I didn't sleep well that night, turning everything over in my head, wondering if I was really being selfish or if they were being completely irrational. The next day, I got an email from my Aunt Elizabeth. Again, this time even longer than the previous one. She basically told me she'd talked to my mom, and they'd decided that the fair thing was for me to contribute $1,500 a month for Andrew's mortgage, plus $300 for the kids' extracurricular activities, plus $200 for general family expenses. She also mentioned I should consider paying retroactively for the months I hadn't contributed, which would be like another $3,000 additional. It was completely delusional, honestly, but the way she wrote the email made it seem like this was perfectly reasonable and I was a monster for not agreeing. I didn't respond to that email either. Instead, I sent a message to the family group clearly saying I wasn't going to contribute financially, beyond what I'd already done, that I supported Andrew in his job search, but that he needed to find his own solution, and that I hoped they'd respect my decision. Total silence for 2 days, which gave me hope they'd finally accepted it. But then the real nightmare started. My mom called my work, literally my office, and left a message with the receptionist, saying it was urgent that I contact her about a serious family matter. The receptionist gave me the message all worried, asking if everything was okay. And I had to explain. It was a family misunderstanding and there was no emergency. It was super embarrassing. I sent my mom a message telling her to never, never call my work again, and she responded with something like, well, you weren't answering through other means. I needed to make sure you were okay. Then, Andrew started sending me Amazon links to things for his kids, like expensive backpacks, laptops, toys, with messages like, "The kids really need this for school," or "It would be nice if Aunt Amanda could help with this." It was so manipulative, using his kids as a guilt tool. I blocked Andrew after like the fifth message like that. My parents then changed tactics and sent me a formal email, like drafted as if it were a legal document or something, where they detailed a family contribution structure, where I should pay $2,000 monthly plus back payments from the last 3 months for a total of $6,000. They also included an agreement. They wanted me to sign committing to these payments for the next 2 years or until Andrew stabilized financially. I read it like 3 times because I couldn't believe it. It was real. It seemed like something out of a comedy movie about dysfunctional families. Obviously, I didn't sign anything or respond. My dad started running a smear campaign among relatives, calling uncles and cousins, telling them his version of the story, where I was a cruel daughter who had abandoned her family in their time of need. Andrew posted on Facebook an ambiguous post, but obviously directed at me, about how some people forget where they come from when they have success, and how he always valued family above everything. His friends commented with supportive messages and heart emojis, not knowing the real context. The worst was when my parents started showing up at my house unannounced. How did they get my new address? I have no idea. They probably asked some mutual friend or checked my utility accounts or something. They'd arrive like 6 in the evening with printed documents of family budgets and expense calculations, trying to show me why I owed to help. I had to tell them several times they weren't going to change my mind and to stop showing up unannounced, but they kept doing it. My mom also started contacting my friends, sending them messages on Facebook or Instagram saying she was worried about me and suggesting I was having some kind of nervous breakdown or identity crisis. Several of my friends wrote me confused, asking if I was okay, and I had to explain the whole situation, which was exhausting and embarrassing because I didn't want to drag them into my family drama. Andrew started sending me increasingly aggressive messages, directly blaming me for his financial problems, saying that if he lost his house, it would be my fault, that his kids were going to suffer because of my selfishness. One particularly horrible message said something like, "I hope you can sleep well at night knowing your nieces and nephews are going hungry while you spend money on luxury hotels." His kids weren't going hungry. Obviously, they were living for free in our parents' house, but he needed to dramatize to justify his victimhood. My parents escalated even more and started showing up at my work, like sitting in the lobby waiting for me to come out of meetings, with papers and calculators ready to show me their numbers. My boss eventually called me into his office and gently asked if I needed time off to resolve personal matters, because the situation was starting to affect my professional image. I explained the basics of the situation, and he was very understanding, but he suggested I consider getting a restraining order if my parents kept harassing me at work. That conversation with my boss was like the breaking point for me. I realized the situation wasn't going to get better, that my parents and Andrew were never going to stop pressuring me, and that I needed to make a drastic change. I'd been avoiding thinking about it. But the truth is, my relationship with my family was already destroyed anyway. So what was I gaining by staying in Edmonton? Turns out I'd been getting job offers from other cities for months, recruiters contacting me through LinkedIn. That kind of thing. I'd always ignored them because I was comfortable where I was, but I started looking at those opportunities more seriously. A company in another state had contacted me like 3 times in the last year, and their last offer included paid relocation, salary increase, and basically all the perks I could want. I responded saying I was interested. We had several video interviews, and they offered me the job in less than 2 weeks. The start date was in a month and a half, which gave me enough time to organize everything. I didn't tell anyone in my family, literally no one, that I was planning to move. I kept responding to occasional messages from my mom with short answers like, "I'm busy with work," or "We'll talk later." I organized everything in silence, hired a moving company to take my stuff from storage directly to my new apartment in the other state, finished my work in Edmonton professionally with 2 weeks' notice to my company, and basically disappeared. The day I flew to my new city, I sent a group email to my family briefly, explaining that I'd accepted a job opportunity in another state, that I needed this change, and that for now I needed space to focus on my new life. I also made it clear I wasn't going to give my new address or contact information beyond my email, and that I'd reach out when I was ready. The responses were predictable. My mom sent like 15 messages in a row between digital crying and anger. My dad wrote me a super formal email basically disowning me as a daughter. Andrew posted on social media about family members who run from their responsibilities. My Aunt Elizabeth sent another miles-long email about regret and consequences. I put everything on silent and focused on settling into my new life. It's been like 4 months since I moved. And honestly, it's the most liberating decision I've made in my life. My new job is challenging but rewarding. My apartment is small but completely mine. I don't have to deal with constant family drama or feel guilty for setting normal boundaries. I've made some friends here. I go out more. I sleep better. I don't have that constant anxiety of wondering when the next manipulative message is going to arrive. My parents tried to contact my new job about 2 months ago, but they didn't have enough information to find exactly where I worked. They only knew the city. Eventually, they found me on LinkedIn and tried to contact me there, but I have my settings on private, so they couldn't do much. My mom sent me an email last week saying Andrew finally got a job, something in sales with a decent salary apparently, and that she hoped I was happy now that the family was doing well. I didn't respond. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever reconcile with them. Part of me misses what we had before all this. Or maybe I miss the idea of what I thought we had. Because looking back, I can see the dysfunctional dynamic was always there. I just justified it or ignored it. Andrew was always the favorite. My parents always had different expectations for each of us. And I was always the one who had to be reasonable and mature, while he could be irresponsible and everyone would run to rescue him. What I do know is that I made the right decision in prioritizing my well-being and my peace of mind over my family's toxic expectations. I didn't owe them my financial stability. I didn't have to sacrifice my future to subsidize Andrew's bad decisions, and I definitely didn't deserve the harassment and manipulation they put me through. Sometimes I feel guilty, like I wonder if I was too harsh or if I should have tried harder. But then I remember all the times I tried to reason with them, all the times I explained my boundaries, and how they never respected any of it. I still have difficult days, especially on important dates like birthdays or holidays, when I see other people with their families and I realize I'm basically alone now. But I also have days where I feel incredibly free and grateful to have escaped that situation before it consumed me completely. I'm building my own version of family here, with friends who respect my boundaries and support me without conditions or absurd financial expectations. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with my family. Maybe someday my parents will understand why I had to leave, or maybe they never will, and that's okay too. Andrew will probably continue being irresponsible and expecting others to rescue him. My parents will probably keep enabling that behavior. And I'll be here, in my new city, living my life and being happy. And that's enough for now, I guess.